would like to ask you a question. You mentioned non-aligned movement as one of the major planks of Nehru's tenure. But wouldn't you like to also comment on the pivotal role that he played for the Commonwealth as far as that group of nations is concerned? And if we talk about the 71 war, Mrs. Indira Gandhi's, then Goa's annexation or merger to India, what would you like to comment on these two?
Very, very valid points, but let me answer them one by one. Well, sorry, what was the first one?
The first one, I spoke about the Commonwealth leadership.
The Commonwealth, yes. That's a bit contested because, yes, the Commonwealth appeared to be a great decision because it brought together a group of countries that was in different situations but had a common past, which was under the British Empire. But actually, it was so diverse that it didn't have that much of firepower, if I may use it, in international affairs. I would say, going to a second question,
Goa.
Yes. Now, Goa was an action that was overdue, because if you have overthrown British colonialism, there is no reason why you should accept the remnants of either French or Portuguese colonialism. And so the decision was right, and the world accepted it as such. So it was a big decision, but I would say the non-aligned movement was greater in the sense that you had the largest grouping of countries under one roof in the non-aligned movement, the biggest collection of countries after the United Nations. And for India to play the leading role and get leaders of Africa, Asia, Latin America together was, I think, a great diplomatic achievement.
That's very well brought out, Ambassador. Now, you have almost covered the entire individually these role and contribution of these four prime ministers who took a major, they were major instrumental in shaping India's policy. Still, I would like to ask you that how did the foreign policy evolve during the tenure of these four? Do you see some gradual and distinct changes that took place?
Yes, the change, I would say, there is a kind of continuity and a kind of cohesion in the first 50 years, 5 decades. That's also because the world was going through a different phase. We are talking about the Cold War. Second World War has ended. Yes. India was an independent country, and India's foreign policy was instrumental in getting this group of non-aligned countries together, because they were not just countries that wanted to be equidistant to Washington and Moscow. There were also countries which were poor and developing, and many of them were coming out of colonial rule. So that was a considerable achievement. But the thread continues because Pandit Nehru's policies guided the succeeding prime ministers, also because it was one party virtually that was ruling India for the first 5 decades. The big change came with in the last 2 decades or so, with prime ministers from other parties coming and taking the leadership. But otherwise, you're right, there was a continuity. Now, there were perceptible changes because I would say Mrs. Gandhi turned out to be a realist, in contrast to Nehru was an idealist. That changed. P.V. Narasimha Rao was also a realist. I mean, recognizing Israel was an act of courage, when a lot of people thought it was a very risky one, considering that we have a large Muslim population which would react adversely to our recognizing the Jewish entity. But he went through with it. And to add to Narasimha Rao's intellectual approach, he didn't take the risk lightly. He waited until Yasser Arafat came to Delhi he posed the question to him, and Arafat said, well, why not? We have got an embassy of Egypt, we have got an embassy from Turkey. Why shouldn't India be there? And that's how Mr. Narasimha Rao got the assurance that at least the Palestinians are accepting our decision, and I'm sure our citizens will also do the same thing.
I would also like to get your remarks and response. The initiative and innovative step taken during Mrs. Indira Gandhi's prime ministership prior to 71, when she sent her personal invoice highlighting the refugee crisis and perhaps indicating across the globe that we are being driven to a war and there is no alternative. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because Mrs. Gandhi was the master of diplomatic strategy. The 1971 war was not a spontaneous reaction to something. It was well planned. And it was a great risk, because we were facing a combination of the most powerful countries against us. The Americans to start with. And remember, when the Bangladesh uprising took place, the Americans decided to send a nuclear capable
Seventh Fleet
to the Bay of Bengal to intimidate us. There were the Chinese who were friends of the Pakistanis. And many speculate that China may well have taken, in fact, Washington expected China to intervene in favor of Pakistan. But she took the risk, but she was also assured that we had made very systematic preparation. First, the armed forces were planning it very, very meticulously. Then the diplomatic offensive. She sent her special envoy to the major capitals of the world to tell them that this is what is happening. And guess what? Most of them were not responsive. Most of them weren't concerned. Particularly the United States, under Kissinger and Nixon, they were indifferent to what India was facing, having about 9 million refugees that we had to look after, being such a poor developing countries. But then we had done our bit. Mrs. Gandhi had created the ground for saying, okay, we have to face it alone and we will do it alone. And then waited and waited until the Pakistanis attacked us. And then our troops went in. So it was a brilliant exercise, both in diplomacy and in military tactics.
Thank you, Ambassador. That brings us to the end of the first video. And in the next video, we would talk about continuity from the era of these four brilliant prime ministers to the present times. Thank you.